Welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you all to what is now our second event in the Women of the South series. Women of the South, Radicals and Revolutionaries, to give it its full and proper title, is a programme with a rich mix of content and activities. The main installation running throughout the cafe comprises archival photographs in the form of banners, such as you see here tonight, and a commemorative panel listing the names of the many women in Cumann in Cork City Centre in 1916, and that's on the wall here of the balcony behind you. This will be followed in the next few weeks by a fuller archival photographic installation destined for the balcony wall just over this lovely panel of names. So watch that space. When this last section is completed, we will then officially launch the exhibition at our fourth event, the Salon of Conversation and Exchange, which promises to be a wonderful evening, one to which you are all invited on Saturday, the 11th of June, here in the market. The exhibition as a whole tells a multi-layered story about the contribution made by a diverse number of Irish women who worked towards independence, as well as towards votes for women, women's rights, social and economic justice, and the First World War effort. The project aims to animate this connected story and to be commemorative, yet challenging and reflective. Our intention has been to create a visual cultural trail here in the English market, a very ordinary yet special place, possibly the ideal site to open and make accessible Women of the South to a wider audience, not only to the many local and loyal people who walk through here daily, but also to the throngs of visitors from near and afar. I suppose not very humbly, we think the English market is a Republic of Cork global mecca. We've already gone live with our website, which you can find on Farmgate Cork /Women of the South. Here you will find out more about our forthcoming events, which will include panel discussions, historical lectures, literary readings, and dramatic performances, all here in the market. We hope to keep Women of the South in the public domain in order that we reach more audiences, so next December we plan to gift all the content to Cork City and County Archives collection. Our ultimate plan is to create a living legacy for Women of the South that will open a new repository of sources and images on Cork and Munster women's history in the revolutionary period. And now I'd like to hand you over to Professor Linda Connolly of UCC. Thank you all very much for coming.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. The great Irish women's historian Margaret Ward has stated, because women have been so marginal in the consciousness of those who have researched events, their significance has remained hidden within historical records, waiting for the understanding of someone who wants to know what women did, what they thought, and how they were affected by the upheavals of the past century. Although women's history clearly reveals the importance of the powerless in contributing to the success of those who become powerful, this contribution has at times been deliberately played down and not just simply undervalued. To give serious consideration to their role involves a reappraisal of the reasons for their subsequent exclusion from political and economic life. Cafes run by women have always been integral to revolutions. Some early meetings of the Munster Women's Franchise League were held in Miss Connell's tea room at 112 Patrick Street. Mrs. Guy's Cafe in Dublin, for instance, in the 1970s, also served as a meeting place for Irish feminists to organise the second wave of the Irish women's movement. Likewise, the Farmgate Cafe is a known critical space and meeting point where culture often meets politics and debate. In this spirit, the space we are in tonight has been, I think you would agree, spectacularly transformed by Rebecca and Kay Hart into a space for often forgotten or marginalised radicals and revolutionaries in the context of the iconic English market in Cork and in this year and decade of commemorations. It is a space that has been physically transformed in order to address both the historical and contemporary position of Irish women, and we have a number of events in the next months which address both the past and present. but most particularly this exhibition and programme has been developed to address the forgotten women of the South and of Cork who played a key role in the period of revolutions in the early decades of the 20th century. So tonight we are pleased to host an event which engages with the lives of the women on the banners displayed and on the roll call that we see at the back, and that engages with the activism of many other women of the South who shaped Irish history. The stunning banners we see here tonight were expertly designed by Kevin Smith, and I think he has to be commended on doing a fabulous job. So our first speakers this evening are two UCC historians, Dr. John Borganova and Dr. Sandra McAvoy, and they're going to explain who the women on the banners are in particular and what they did. This introduction then to the banners will be followed by a set of performances from the students of the Department of Drama and Theatre Studies at UCC, who will reenact some of the stories of women in Cork in particular, who were active agents in Cumann na mBan and also in the suffrage movement. As we'll see in a moment, new sources, such as the witness statements by women of Cork County and in Munster, are what can only be described as a treasure trove of information, but most particularly written in the women's own voice and experience, and that is critically important. Our actors this evening are Aisling Reardon, second year drama and theatre studies at UCC, Katie Murphy, third year drama and theatre studies at UCC, Niamh Linehan, freelance actor and theatre practitioner in Cork, and Dr. Marie Kelly, Andy Crook and Maureen O'Connor both directed and prepared the script. So I'm first going to hand you over to John Borganova and Sandra McAvoy, and then we'll carry on with the performances. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. There's been a lot of talk about gender quotas recently, and I just want to really say I'm here as a gender quota. It's really worked out for me, so they work. I also want to give a shameless plug for a lecture series, a public lecture series up at UCC, 6 o'clock every Wednesday during the month of May. And there's some flyers out there, but that's, again, a shameless plug. I'm just going to introduce 3 of our banners, and I'm going to start with the last one, which is Kathleen Clark. Kathleen Clark was born in Limerick in 1878. She was a dressmaker, a small shop owner, and she ultimately married Tom Clark, the IRB leader who was executed in 1916. During the War of Independence, Kathleen Clark was a leading member of the Sinn Féin elite. She was a vice president of Cumann na mBan. She served a jail term in 1918. And like many women, she maintained multiple roles. She was a Dublin Corporation councillor. She was a board member of the Harcourt Street Children's Hospital. She was a district court judge in the Doyle-Aaron courts. She co-founded the Irish White Cross. She was elected to the second Doyle in 1921. She opposed the Anglo-Irish Treaty. She lost her seat in 1922, but was re-elected in 1927. She co-founded Fianna Fáil, but ultimately left the party. She served a term as the Lord Mayor of Dublin, and she consistently fought for women's rights in the Doyle and in the Senate. And she opposed the 1937 Constitution on gender grounds, and she died in 1972 at the age of 94. Our second woman, who's kind of in the mid, actually I can't see them quite, I think she's number 3 there, is May Conlon. May Conlon isn't that well known outside of Cork. She's probably best known as the sister of Lil Conlon, who wrote the first history of Cumann na mBan in the early 1970s. May was born in 1883. She was the daughter of a pipe fitter in Murphy's Brewery. She grew up on Blarney Street and later Sundays Well. Both her brothers received MAs at UCC and taught up there, while her sisters were all active in Cumann na mBan. May trained as a secretary at the Cork School of Commerce. She performed in Republican theater groups, and she helped establish the Cork Cumann. She served as secretary to the Shandon branch at Cumann and secretary to the Cork District Council. In 1919, May and 5 other Cumann members in Cork were jailed for 1 month for collecting Republican funds without a permit. They refused to recognize the court, disrupted its proceedings by singing and refusing to face the judge, and were accompanied from the Bridewell to the Cork Women's Prison on Sundays well by throngs of female supporters who serenaded them the whole way from the prison van. May took the pro-treaty side during the Civil War and was a leader of Cumann na Saoirse, the pro-treaty Cumann group, and some of those women are on our kind of big banner back there. She was devoutly Catholic, raised funds for the African missions, and died in Cork in 1946. Our final woman is number 2 there, Mary McSweeney, who was born in 1872 and raised in Cork. She was the eldest of the McSweeney children. She lost her foot at a young age. In the early years of the century, between teaching jobs in England, she became very active in Cork separatist circles, in the Gaelic League and in experimental theatre and Sinn Féin, and she was also a member of the Munster Women's Franchise League. She co-founded Cork Cumann. She was also briefly arrested by British troops after the Easter Rising while teaching at St. Angela's Ursuline School here in Cork. The Ursuline nuns fired her, but she promptly opened her own school, the celebrated Scole Ida on Wellington Road. During the War of Independence, she was one of the Republicans' most effective spokespersons. She became an international celebrity after touring the United States in 1921. She was a TD from 1921 to 27 here in the city constituency and remained a leader of Sinn Féin, which still refused to recognize the Irish Free State at the time of her death in 1942. And among the Republican women here in Cork, she was the most high profile, yet she's been very much forgotten in this city in a way that seems to be as much about her gender as her politics as well. So she's someone we want to reclaim. So I'll hand over to Sandra now.
I suppose introducing these women is a little bit like speed dating, and you will be able to find out more about them as the exhibition progresses and as the website is developed. My job tonight is to introduce you first to Suzanne Day, who is the woman dressed for a performance of the Mikado in the very first of the banners closest to me. And incidentally, yesterday was the 140th anniversary of her birth. And it's fitting that she's shown dressed for the theatre, because the theatre was her first love. And plays by Suzanne and her co-writer Geraldine Cummins were performed by the Abbey Company in 1913 and 1917. And she's been mentioned recently in relation to the Waking the Feminists campaign. And we're very grateful indeed to Suzanne's great niece Amy Ramsden and her husband Chris for letting us use their photograph in the exhibition. Suzanne's actually represented here not so much as a playwright, but because she was central to the Munster Women's Franchise League and its fight for the vote for women. And for 4 years, from the end of 1910, she put huge energy into developing and expanding the organisation across the province, so that it had branches in places like Skibbereen, Limerick, Waterford, Neenah, Tralee and Valentia. And she was very active in organising and speaking at meetings all across the province. In its heyday, the League involved women of every shade of political opinion, and as she put it, the committee included intense unionists and Sinn Féiners. And another of the women introduced tonight, Mary McSweeney, was on that committee. One of the League's first projects in 1911 was to support 4 women candidates in the Cork Poor Law elections to elect guardians to the board that ran the workhouse. It was the first political position open to women in the city. And Suzanne and her running mate, Hannah Mary Barry, a widowed mother of 8 and the proprietress of a plumbing business, topped the poll in the Northeast Ward. And they issued a statement, a sort of victory statement, in which they emphasised that they had stood solely in the interests of the poor, and something they clearly considered set them apart from the other candidates. And Suzanne's best known work is probably her 1916 novel, The Amazing Philanthropists, which is a sharp-eyed, ironic and very funny, but only slightly fictionalised account of the struggle of a woman poor law guardian to bring about common sense reforms. She exposed petty local politicking, nepotism, and the crying need to abolish the workhouse system, and it didn't win her many friends among Cork politicians. Day also stood in the Cork City municipal election in 1914, the first in which women could stand as candidates, and she missed a seat by 6 votes. As a suffragist, she stood as a non-party candidate, but she was a home ruler, and she believed that home rule would bring votes for women and that women and men would cooperate on social projects. She opposed the war. She considered war was an evil and that women must work to abolish war. And in 1915, she went as a volunteer with a Quaker unit in France, supporting women and children who'd been displaced as battlefields ploughed through their homes. She chronicled their stories in a book called Roundabout Bar-le-Duc. By the time it was published in 1918, she was carving out a career as a journalist in London, which was no mean feat for a woman at that stage. And it's an indication of her personal determination. She actually edited a highly respected feminist journal, The English Woman, between 1917 and 1921. And her work appears in a range of publications, including, for example, the Yorkshire Post. The second person that I'm very pleased to introduce is Hannah G. Skeffington, who is the woman in her graduation robes. I think she's the second banner in from the bottom end there. And I think she's probably the most familiar of the figures for many people, whether from Cork or elsewhere. She's the person people think of in connection with the suffrage movement in Ireland. But many people may not recognise her Cork credentials. She was born in Kanturk, and there's a wonderful statue of her in the park at Kanturk, I think one of the best statues of someone from this period anywhere in Ireland. It's difficult to sum up the career of someone like Hannah G. Skeffington, who had 40 years of political activity, in just a few minutes. But she was the co-founder of the Irish Women's Franchise League, whose members understood they were signing up to militancy if it was required. And in June 1912, soon after the failure of a bill expected to give parliamentary votes to some women property owners, and the publication of a Home Rule bill that also didn't deliver votes for women, Hannah was sentenced to a month in Mountjoy for breaking windows in Ship Street Barracks, Dublin, at Dublin Castle, which was considered the property of the War Office. She spent the last week of her imprisonment on a hunger strike. She was imprisoned again in 1913, in December 1913, charged with assaulting a policeman, although it was very clear that the policeman had assaulted her. And in fact, 200 people turned up at the courtroom and laughed at the charges. They were so ridiculous. But she was again sentenced to prison, went on hunger strike, and after 3 days she was released because her health deteriorated very quickly. As a committed pacifist, she wrote of suffragist militancy, that desperate diseases need desperate remedies. And she made clear that the Irish Women's Franchise League militancy had always been directed at property and never at people. As demonstrated in the columns of the Irish Citizen, the feminist journal edited by her husband Francis G. Skeffington and James Cousins, Hannah was deeply concerned about social issues as they affected women. And in 1911, she joined the Irish Women Workers' Union at its inauguration, and was involved with her friend Constance Markovich in soup kitchens during the 1913 lockout. In the 1930s, she recalled how much James Connolly had influenced her views on equal pay and equal opportunities for women as well as for men. After the shocking murder of her husband, Frank, by a British officer during the Easter Rising, she toured the United States, speaking about the political situation in Ireland at some 250 meetings between 1917 and 1918. She met President Wilson and gave him a petition signed by the Cumann na mBan executive calling for Ireland's rights to be recognised amongst those of small nations. Sinn Féin nominated her as a candidate for the general election in 1918 when women over 30 had the parliamentary vote for the first time. She declined, but she was elected a Sinn Féin councillor to Dublin City Council. And she was Sinn Féin Director of Organisation during the Truce in 1921. And she was on the executive of Fianna Fáil from its foundation in 1926, resigning when De Valera decided to enter the Dáil. She played a role in numerous organisations, remaining a pacifist in the decades after independence and involved in groups like the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she co-founded the Irish Women's Citizens and Local Government Association, which after 1922 lobbied extensively on women's issues. She would also oppose the 1937 Constitution and supported a women's party that emerged at that time, standing as one of their candidates for the party which by then had become the Women's Social and Political League. She stood as a candidate in 1943. She didn't win. By then the country was deeply conservative and women's parties did not have the kind of machine behind them that the male parties had. She died 3 years later. I'll just finish by saying that Maria Luddy noted a quote from Mary Collum that summed up the optimism and radicalism of that early period of the 20th century that our exhibition will commemorate. And she said, "Almost everything significant was run by the young. Youth, eagerness, brains, imagination. There was something else, a desire for self-sacrifice, a devotion to causes. Everyone was working for a cause, for practically everything was a cause." I think you're next going to hear some of the words of women who, in that spirit of self-sacrifice, devoted themselves to the most radical of causes. Thank you.
Nora Daly Dore, witness statement. Limerick, 9th of September, 1948. Between midnight and 1 a.m., the second day of the rising, I was asked if I would try to get out of the city, Dublin, and make my way to Cork to deliver a verbal message to Terry McSweeney. And the message was, "Tell Terry McSweeney we are in action and we know he will follow us." I agreed to try, and with my sister, who was asked to go to Limerick, we left the General Post Office under the guidance of Eamon T. Dore, who was to get us through the British lines and to Kingsbridge. There was a train waiting to take refugees, people who had come to Dublin for the bank holiday and got held due to the rising. The train was to leave at 6 a.m. and just on time our guide got us there, though on the way he was held 4 or 5 times for questioning. Nobody was allowed into the station unless he or she was the holder of a return ticket. We had on us 2 return tickets for Limerick and got on the train with those. Having seen us into the station, our guide left us to try to get back to the General Post Office to report the success of the first part of our journey. Months later, we were to learn he succeeded. When we were well out of Kingsbridge, there was a check of tickets. And after much fumbling, I told the checker I'd lost my return ticket to Cork. He knew I could not have got on the train without a return ticket. So he very kindly, much to my delight, took particulars, issued me a pass to Cork, for which I paid. My sister parted with me at Limerick Junction, and I, with my pass, went to Cork. And disappointment. Now, the only address I had was McSweeney's private address. I drove there to find from the people next door that they were away in the country. On the advice of the neighbour, I left my bag with some people who lived across the road from the McSweeneys. I then started for the city to try and find there the volunteer headquarters. This city was full of military, and I was afraid to ask anyone for information. I remembered. I heard of a Limerick girl who worked at Thompson's Confectioners. I found her, but she did not know where the volunteer headquarters was, but told me where a volunteer officer Sean Jennings, had a shop. I went there to find he was at a friend's house. I found it after much trouble. He had been married that morning. He sent me back to his shop and told me to wait there and he would send a Boy Scout to take me to see Terry McSweeney at headquarters. This Boy Scout took me to the volunteer headquarters and there I met Terry McSweeney, R.I.P., and Tomas McCurtain, R.I.P. I told them what had been done in Dublin and that Sean McDermott sent me to deliver a verbal message. Tell Terry McSweeney we are in action and I know he will follow us. They both seemed to think Dublin was wrong, and they were right. They said they had documents to prove they were right. Now, in the course of discussion, I told them I did not know why Dublin decided to go out on Monday, but whatever Tom Clark and Sean McDermott did was right in my eyes. They said they would wait until they were attacked, as they were not in a position to attack, that they would not give up their rifles. The Bishop of Cork, Dr. Cohalan, had been in with them a couple of times, asking them to give their rifles to him. And when I was leaving, after delivering my message and listening to their reply, they asked me to come back in the morning and take a message to Limerick. And just as I was leaving, I met Mary McSweeney. She had been from home, and she took me to her house for the night. I went with her to see them again in the morning, but they said they had decided to send a messenger of their own to Limerick, as she could bring them back an answer. Well, I left with Mary McSweeney, and we were followed by 2 policemen. She took me to her house, where I changed my costume, the better to escape notice, and going out by another door, got down to the railway station, where I found all Dublin-bound trains were stopped. I had intended trying to get back to Dublin to report my failure with Terry McSweeney and Tomas McCurtain. So I took a train leaving for Limerick, thinking to get to Dublin from there. But again, failed. I have said that the only decision I could get out of Terry McSweeney and Tomas McCurtain was that they would not give up their arms. Before I left Cork on Thursday, I heard that they had actually handed them over to Bishop Cohalan. The reason I was selected to go to Cork was the message being verbal. The messenger would have to be known to Terry McSweeney. I and my family were well known to the McSweeneys. Signed, Nora Daly Dorr.
Native Peg Duggan, who lived at 49 Thomas David Street, joined Cumann na mBan in 1913, as soon as it was established in Cork, and remained active in the cause of Ireland until 1921. Peg and her sister Annie sold flowers, initially in a shop that was closed by the police in 1919, and later at a stall in the Cornmarket Square. Annie Duggan established Clon na Gael, Republican Girl Guides in Cork, while her sister Sarah, a seamstress, was president of Cumann na mBan's Cork District Council. The following are excerpts from her lengthy witness statement, recorded on the 14th of February, 1957, which covers the period from 1913 to 1921. Peg Duggan served as captain of the Tomás Cant branch of Cumann na mBan, which encompasses the Blackpool area, and was the treasurer of the Prisoners' Dependence Fund, Cork.
Peg Duggan, witness statement. In 1913, when the Cumann na mBan was established in Cork, I and my sisters joined. At a later date, I was appointed to the post as captain of the Cork Cumann. The Cumann organised céilís and concerts for volunteer funds. I remember we organised an excursion to Bantry on one occasion by way of a cover for volunteers who were collecting guns on the Cork coast. When Padraig Pearse reviewed volunteers in Limerick City in I think 1915, I went to a party of the Cork Cumann Man. After the meeting, on our return to the railway station at Limerick, we were attacked with stones, sticks and bottles by the pro-British element in Limerick. I, with members of the Cork Cumann, also went with a contingent of Cork volunteers to the funeral in Dublin of O'Donovan Rossa in August 1915. I took a wreath and was at the graveside where I heard the famous oration given by Padraig Pearse. On the Sunday of Easter week 1916, the Cumann Man were aware that the boys were going on a route march to the country, but we got no instructions as to accompany them. I do not know that the boys did return to Cork City later that Easter Sunday night. On Monday night, I went to Ungrenon, but again got no instructions. Well, I reported there each night, but there was nothing doing. Next, we heard of the surrender of the volunteers' guns to the Lord Mayor. Not all of the volunteers agreed to hand up their guns, so we took away some of the arms of those who refused to surrender them and kept them in safekeeping. There was no military action taken by either the Cork City Volunteers or the Cumann Man during Easter week 1916. It was, I think, about the month of November 1916, or perhaps early in 1917, when Cumann Man was declared an illegal organisation by British authorities. Following this announcement, a special meeting of the Cork Cumann was called. Mary McSweeney addressed the meeting and put it to the members whether to decide whether we should carry on, in view of the fact that our organisation had now been declared illegal, and members would be liable to arrest and imprisonment. The vast majority of those present decided to carry on under the name Cumann Man Crave Corkig. As activity against the British forces increased and many volunteers had to go on the run to escape arrest, it was a job of Cumann Man to provide for these men, either in the homes of Cumann Man or in the houses of reliable sympathisers. I might state here that my own home in Thomas Davis Street, Cork, was a regular hideout for men on the run, with the result that it was raided by police, one of the many raids by police and military subsequently. And my sister Sarah was arrested. She was sentenced to a month's imprisonment in Cork jail. Countess Markovich was also in Cork jail at the time, along with Cumann Man girls and from Killarney and elsewhere. It may be of interest to record my recollections on the night of the 20th of March 1920, when Tomás McCurtain was murdered by British forces in his home in Blackpool. My own home is almost directly across the street from the McCurtain's house. On the night in question, we went to bed and we noticed the gas lamps being put out. This would have fixed a time at about 12:30 a.m. Very shortly afterwards, we heard a thundering knock at the door, followed by shots up and down the street. Well, my sister Annie and I jumped out of bed and put our coats on over our night attire. We met Reverend Father Burtz, who told us he had got a phone message from the McCurtains to say that Tomás had been shot. The priest, my sister Annie and I arrived at the McCurtains in a very short amount of time and were met by Mrs. McCurtain. Father Burtz heard Tomás's confession on the stairs landing. Tomás was lying there where he was shot, but he was conscious. We were present while he was being anointed, and after the anointing, he died where he lay. An ambulance arrived and the men lifted the remains onto the bed. We all knelt by the bedside to say the rosary when a party of British military arrived, accompanied by uniformed RIC. The military and police searched every nook and cranny in that house. even on the bed on which Tomas lay dead. But they found nothing. Before leaving, they disclaimed all knowledge of what happened. During the hottest period of the fight, my home was a constant rendezvous for IRA men. Plans were prepared in our house for ambushing of British military and police. Following another ambush at Blackpool, our home was again raided by military, and my father was taken out to be shot. He was, fortunately, released. My brother was arrested in another raid at our home and sent to prison on Spike Island. I and my sisters devoted every spare moment of our time to harboring wanted men, carting ammunition and guns for the IRA, visiting prisoners in jails, providing comforts for them, carrying dispatches, and, in general, assisting by every means in our power in the fight for freedom. We were engaged in these activities when the truce of July 1921 came.
The last witness statement is from Mrs. Muriel McSweeney, originally a Murphy. Her family owned the Middleton Distillery in Cork, while another branch of the family ran the Murphy's Brewery. At the time of her writing of this witness statement, October of 1951, she was the widow of Terence McSweeney, famous Lord Mayor of Cork, who died on hunger strike in 1920 in Brixton Prison. The lengthy witness statement includes memories of Terence, including his death in prison. The excerpts you are about to hear detail the events leading up to Muriel meeting her future husband in 1916.
Mrs. Muriel McSweeney witness statement. I was 17 when I left my snobbish convent school in Leonard-on-Sea, where I learned nothing, except how to be a lady, which I never became. My family, of course, were completely imperialistic, conservative, capitalist, and Roman Catholic. And these were the ideas that were instilled into me and carefully fostered. I think it was reading Sinn Féin and the Irish Volunteer newspapers what turned my mind away from these ideas favoured by my family. It was in Liam Russell's shop on Grand Parade that I got these papers. And you met everybody there. He was a volunteer, and all the heads of the volunteers, Tomas McCurtain, Sean Sullivan, Liam de Rochta, and occasionally Terry McSmeeney would be there. There was another little newspaper shop kept by two sisters, the Mrs. Wallace, later connected with the Citizens' Army. The first national occasion at which I was present was a public meeting in memory of the Manchester Martyrs in Grand Parade, Cork, in the autumn of 1915. It would be about the end of 1915, I would imagine, that I became actively interested in the national movement, and I became a member of Cumann na mBan, either at the end of 1915 or the beginning of 1916, and attended meetings at different places. I used to visit the McSweeney house on Victoria Road, and as far as I can remember, it was Mary McSweeney was the president, and Miss Nora O'Brien, who had the hat shop, was the secretary of Cumann na mBan. A short time before the rising, I was in Dublin, and I must have had a message for Terry, because I waited for him in Parnell Square, outside the Gaelic Leave offices. And after giving him whatever message I had, I asked him if something was going to happen. And he said, any day. We all knew those volunteers marched out into the country on Easter Sunday, taking 2 days' rations with them. And they came back on Monday, at some time I can't remember when. And although I came from such a frightful family, the volunteers always treated me very well and trusted me. Even Sean O'Hegarty, who was a very suspicious man. I afterwards learned that Terry distrusted me before he had met me because of the family that I came from. And you know, he was right.
And moving on to the final part of the evening, and I want to introduce our guest speaker. We are deeply honoured to have Justine McCarthy with us this evening. Justine McCarthy is a writer, broadcaster, and a journalist with the Sunday Times. She is one of Ireland's most respected commentators on politics and culture, and she is adjunct professor of journalism at the University of Limerick. She is the author of Mary McAleese, The Outsider, and of Deep Deception, Ireland's Swimming Scandals, which was aptly described by Fintan O'Toole as the best of the large crop of books by journalists that year. It grows beyond its immediate subject to become a terrifying anatomy of the capacity for denial and vilification within any enclosed world. Justine is, of course, most importantly, also a woman of the South, as she hails from Bandon, County Cork. So I invite you all to welcome Justine here this evening.
Good evening. My new friend here, Maurice, was telling me earlier that the last speaker you had here was very witty. I just want to warn you, if you've come expecting sparkling wit, now is the time to leave. There's serious business to discuss. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and also quite scary. Coming home and being amongst your own is quite a terrifying experience. As Linda mentioned, I'm from Bandon, and this morning my husband and I had a drive down to Bandon, and as we were leaving, Dennis remarked on what a lovely town it is. And I was thinking, yes, it is. And then I remembered that my cousin Johnny McCarthy, who's sitting over there, sent me an email last week, and attached to it was a copy of the official order issued by the then occupying authorities, expelling his maternal grand-aunts from Cork for their Cumann na mBan illicit activities and banishing them to Bandon. So what is one woman's proud boast was other women's cruel and unusual punishment. So we're gathered here 100 years after Ireland led the world with its fight for a republic of equals. And we do so against what I think is rather disturbing mood music. We've recently had the Taoiseach, Joan Burton, talking about the sexism she encounters in politics. And we've had the outgoing Senator Gillian Van Turnout telling us how she was literally pinned against a wall in Leinster House by fellow politicians who were trying to persuade her of whatever argument to be on their side. We do so as we have 8 politicians negotiating to form the next government, and only one of them is a woman. We do so as 15 independent TDs last week, or the week before, I can't remember, the weeks are all blending into one, organised a meeting in Leinster House to agree on their position. And only when the meeting was over did they realise that they had forgotten to invite 2 of the independent TDs. Those 2 happened to be the only 2 women, Maureen O'Sullivan and Catherine Sapone. So what would the 1916 revolutionaries have thought of this? I imagine they would have thought that the cause is not quite won yet. There's been a lot of talk this year about rewriting history and putting women back in their rightful place into history, and that has been very welcome. But I find that a lot of it has been very tokenistic, and we can see that from the women here. I mean, we have not heard some of these mentioned at all this year. I don't want to be a critic of RTE because I think it's done very good work. I think the debate on the GPO was excellent. I thought the concert during Easter weekend was really uplifting and moving, but its drama output. We were told that Rebellion was going to be the flagship that was going to be told. It was going to tell the story of the Rising through 3 different women. And what did we get? We got 2 women sitting in a mansion out in Dalkey waiting for the man of their dreams to come out and choose between them. And a 3rd woman who had something of an army uniform fetish, and the highlight of her activity in the Rising was a lesbian kiss. So the women of Cork and of Munster never shrank from the struggle for freedom. Even after it was won and the fairer sex had been sent packing back to the kitchen by the new state, the rebel county, and I would say the rebel province, lived up to its name. Mary McSweeney was one of only 2 women TDs in the Dáil, in the 3rd Dáil, elected in 1923, the other being Sinn Féin's Professor Kate O'Callaghan. In fact, Kate, whose maiden name was Murphy, was another Cork woman. So the only 2 women TDs were Cork women. Both Mary and Kate were arrested and interned together in Kilmainham jail. Kate's husband, Michael O'Callaghan, was a former mayor of Limerick, and he was murdered during the War of Independence, it's thought by members of the Black and Tans. They came to the O'Callaghan's home in the middle of the night. When the couple were in bed, they shot Michael dead, and they left Kate at the bottom of the stairs, shot in the arm. When Jim Kemmy, the late Limerick socialist politician, wrote a biographical note on Michael Murphy, he observed that Kate had provided what he called an intellectual spur to her husband's yearning for Irish self-determination. She had academic qualifications from both the Royal University of Ireland and Cambridge and served 2 consecutive terms as a TD. Yet, if you check her Wikipedia entry, you'll find it runs to a grand total of precisely 7 sentences. When Kate, in a letter Kate wrote to Eamon de Valera on the 23rd of May 1937, she outlined her objections to his draft constitution. Specifically, she deplored the articles relating to the status of women, calling them a great disappointment, not just to her, but, I quote, to the many who hoped for the equal rights and equal opportunities which the proclamation of the Republic in 1916 guaranteed to all its citizens. She wrote, in the period of the war with England, 1916 to 1923, the Irish nation rose to the test as never before in its history, men and women serving alike. There was no talk then of the inadequate strength of women, or their differences of capacity, physical and moral, and of social function. And I am surprised that you, who lived through the period in intimate contact with the ordinary people of the nation, and valued, I think, the splendid service of the women of the people, now include in this draft constitution clauses which, however well-intentioned, will militate against women in a state based on their work and sacrifice. Kate lost her seat in the next general election. So did Maura. It would take 54 more years before the number of women in the Dáil would reach double figures, when 11 women were elected in 1981. In that half-century, Kate O'Callaghan's dire warning and prescient words that the sidelining of women by Bunreacht na hÉireann would militate against them proved painfully, scandalously, and in many cases, tragically, all too true. The disproportionate representation of women in the Dáil is commonly regarded as something of an optical problem. The great, stonking, fossilised maleness of Leinster House is a bad look for a country that wants to be seen as modern and progressive. The shallowness of the debate about the lack of women in political life seldom allows for deeper examination of its cause and effect. When Lehman Brothers Bank crashed, causing Western economies to follow suit in 2008, some people wondered what might have happened if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman's sisters. While nobody can say it would have been better, undoubtedly it would have been different. The same can be said about the treatment of women by the Irish state since its foundation. There is no shortage of examples of how the absence of women's voices in the Dáil has had direct and damaging consequences for female citizens and for their families. Think of Noel Brown's doomed mother and child scheme, when just 5 of the country's 145 TDs were women. Think of the barbaric practice of symphysiotomy, when 1,500 women and girls in childbirth had their pelvises split so that they could continue producing lots of babies. Symphysiotomy was outlawed in Paris in 1798, but it went on in Ireland until the 1980s, and there's even a report of it in the early 1990s. Think of the Magdalen laundries, Ireland's asylums of shame, where unmarried and poor girls and women were sent when they got pregnant. Most of them, by the way, seem to have got pregnant by immaculate conception, because there was never a father mentioned. These men vanished as mysteriously as Elizabeth O'Farrell vanished from the photographs of the rebels' surrender in Moore Street in 1916. Think too of the hepatitis C anti-D scandal, when the Irish state threatened Bridget McCole on her deathbed that it would sue her penniless if she pursued her court case for compensation. And think of the many cruel and sometimes macabre cases that have resulted from the constitutional ban on abortion. On the Christmas Eve before last, I sat in the High Court while 3 judges and 5 teams of lawyers pored over the 8th Amendment. Their unenviable task was to determine if Bunreacht na hÉireann required that a brain-dead young mother of 2 children should be kept artificially breathing until her 15-week-old fetus could be born. 7 doctors gave evidence. Some of them cried as they testified. I wondered what country does something like this to its people. And the answer that came to me was a country that silences the voice of half of its citizens. The good news is that Ireland is turning a corner. The gender quota has come into effect. More women are in key roles shaping the nation, though the critical mass is still pathetically short of what it needs to be. Fairness and equality are ideals that have come back into vogue, particularly in the inspiring atmosphere of the Easter commemorations, and I would also say the inspiring speeches of our President, Michael D. Higgins, who is proof that self-determination is important. Many of the heroic women who laid the foundations for our state have been exhumed from the graveyard of history, and that is a great relief. But what we have to guard against is that the restoration of women to their rightful place is not simply tokenistic. It's not good enough to say Ireland now acknowledges that women participated in the revolution too, because there's this sort of begrudging attitude that goes, sure, wasn't Countess Markievicz there, even if she was a bit of a posh psycho playing soldiers in Stephen's Green? Dublin has been in the spotlight for the 1916 centenary, but when 2021 comes around, Cork, like its women, will also be restored to its rightful place, what Rebecca calls the international Mecca. my generation is the last generation with a link to those who actually remembered the fight and the struggle for independence. I remember my mother telling us many stories about when she arrived in Bandon from Carrigtwohill after marrying my father and finding bullet marks on the back wall in the yard from where the blackened hands had shot at my grandmother, her husband having been interned in Ballykinler, and she ran the pub in Bandon while she had 2 children at that stage under the age of 2, and at night would have to put the children in the horse and trap and travel out to Kilbrittain to stay with family to be safe. So there were many women who were heroes whose stories, have never been told in public. And I think all these women deserve to be celebrated and remembered. The women that this exhibition celebrates have left us a powerful and inspiring legacy, and it behoves us, the present generation and the next generations, to carry their torch onwards to ensure that the cause is ultimately achieved. And women are doing that. The women who have organised this exhibition and this wonderful event are doing exactly that. Particularly women like Kay and Rebecca Hart and this magnificent institution, the Farmgate. And the other women who are involved in organising the exhibition, Maureen, Marie, Linda, Sandra, and the honorary women, John, Andy and Kevin. The stories of these women in the South give us, their descendants, real reason to be proud. Long live the Republic. Long live Monona Heron and the women of the South.
So I just want to draw the evening to a close. I want to finish by thanking all our contributors tonight, the actors, Justine McCarthy, especially for travelling down, and also the project team who've already been mentioned, but I'll mention them again. Kay Hart, Rebecca Hart, Maureen O'Connor, Marie Kelly, John Borganova, Sandra McAvoy, Andy Crook, and Kevin Smith. Just to say as well, our next event is a hedge school, a History Ireland hedge school, here also in the market on Thursday the 12th of May at 6 p.m, and tickets will be available on Eventbrite for that. In the coming weeks, the final sections of the exhibition will be mounted, and you're all welcome to come in and view the materials. To close the proceedings tonight, we're going to finish with an original song which is based on a poem by Padraig Pearse prior to his execution called The Mother. The music has been composed by John Gibson, one of Ireland's leading pianist composers. And we will leave you tonight with this song, which will be sung by Denise Crowley, and she is accompanied by Laura O'Keefe on piano and Mary Hegarty on violin. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. And thank you.
generation